The future came and went in the mildly discouraging way that futures do, although Mr. Young had other things on his mind apart from muddy dresses, and merely banned Adam from watching television, which meant that he had to watch it on the old black and white set in his bedroom. "I don't see why we should have a hosepipe ban," Adam heard Mr. Young telling Mrs. Young. "I pay my rates, like everyone else. The garden looks like the Sahara Desert. I'm surprised that there was any water left in the pond. I blame it on the lack of nuclear testing, myself. You used to get proper summers when I was a boy. It used to rain all the time." Now Adam slouched alone along the dusty lane. It was a good slouch. Adam had a way of slouching along that offended all right-thinking people. It wasn't that he just allowed his body to droop. He could slouch with inflections, and now the set of his shoulders reflected the hurt and bewilderment of those unjustly thwarted in their selfless desire to help their fellow men. Dust hung heavy on the bushes. "Serve everyone right if the witches took over the whole country and made everyone eat health food and not go to church and dance around with no clothes on," he said, kicking a stone. He had to admit that, except perhaps for the health food, the prospect wasn't too worrisome. "I bet if they just let us get started properly, we could have found hundreds of witches," he told himself, kicking a stone. "I bet old Torturmata didn't have to give up just when he was getting started, just because some stupid witch got her dress dirty." Dog slouched along dutifully behind his master. This wasn't, insofar as the hellhound had any expectations, what he had imagined life would be like in the last days before Armageddon. But despite himself, he was beginning to enjoy it. He heard his master say, "Bet even the Victorians didn't force people to have to watch black and white television." Form shapes nature. There are certain ways of behavior appropriate to small, scruffy dogs, which are in fact welded into the genes. You can't just become small dog-shaped and hope to stay the same person. A certain intrinsic small dogness begins to permeate your very being. It had been the most enjoyable experience of his life. "Serve 'em right if we're all overcome by evil forces," his master grumbled. And then there were cats, thought Dog. He'd surprised the huge ginger cat from next door and had attempted to reduce it to cowering jelly by means of the usual glowing stare and deep-throated growl, which had always worked on the damned in the past. This time they earned him a whack on the nose that had made his eyes water. Cats, Dog considered, were clearly a lot tougher than lost souls. He was looking forward to a further cat experiment, which he planned would consist of jumping around and yapping excitedly at it. It was a long shot, but it might just work. "They just better not come running to me when old Picky is turned into a frog, that's all," muttered Adam. It was at this point that two facts dawned on him. One was that his disconsolate footsteps had led him past Jasmine Cottage. The other was that someone was crying. Adam was a soft touch for tears. He hesitated a moment, and then cautiously peered over the hedge. To Anathema, sitting in a desk chair and halfway through a packet of Kleenex, it looked like the rise of a small, disheveled sun. Adam doubted that she was a witch. Adam had a very clear mental picture of a witch. The Youngs restricted themselves to the only possible choice amongst the better class of Sunday newspaper, and so 100 years of enlightened occultism had passed Adam by. She didn't have a hooked nose or warts, and she was young, well, quite young. That was good enough for him. "Hello," he said, unslouching. She blew her nose and stared at him. What was looking over the hedge should be described at this point. What Anathema saw was, she later said, something like a prepubescent Greek god. Or maybe a biblical illustration, one which showed muscular angels doing some righteous smiting. It was a face that didn't belong in the 20th century. It was thatched with golden curls which glowed. Michelangelo should have sculpted it. He probably would not have included the battered sneakers, frayed jeans, or grubby t-shirt, though. "Who are you?" she asked. "I'm Adam Young," said Adam. "I live just down the lane." "Oh, yes, I've heard of you," said Anathema, dabbing at her eyes. Adam preened. "Mrs. Henderson said I was to be sure to keep an eye out for you," she went on. "I'm well known around here," said Adam. "She said you were born to hang," said Anathema. Adam grinned. Notoriety wasn't as good as fame, but was heaps better than obscurity. "She said you were the worst of the lot of them," said Anathema, looking a little more cheerful. Adam nodded. "She said, 'You watch out for them, miss. They're nothing but a pack of ringleaders. That young Adam's full of the old Adam,' she said." "What have you been crying for?" said Adam bluntly. Oh, I've just lost something," said Anathema. "A book." "I'll help you look for it, if you like," said Adam gallantly. "I know quite a lot about books, actually. I wrote a book once. It was a terrific book. It was nearly 8 pages long. It was about this pirate who was a famous detective. And I drew the pictures." And then, in a flash of largesse, he added, "If you like, I'll let you read it. I bet it was a lot more exciting than any book you've got, especially the bit in the spaceship where the dinosaur comes out and fights with the cowboys. I bet he'd cheer you up, my book. It cheered up Brian no end. He said he'd never been so cheered up." "Thank you. I'm sure your book is a very good book," she said, endearing herself to Adam forever. "But I don't need you to help look for my book. I think it's too late now." She looked thoughtfully at Adam. "I expect you know this area very well," she said. "For miles and miles," said Adam. "You haven't seen 2 men in a big black car," said Anathema. "Did they steal it?" said Adam, suddenly full of interest. Foiling a gang of international book thieves would make a rewarding end to the day. "Not really. Sort of. I mean, they didn't mean to. They were looking for the manor, but I went up there today and no one knows anything about them. There was some sort of accident or something, I believe." She stared at Adam. There was something odd about him, but she couldn't put her finger on it. She just had an urgent feeling that he was important and shouldn't be allowed to drift away. Something about him. "What's the book called?" said Adam. "The Nice and Accurate Prophecies of Agnes Nutter, Witch," said Anathema. "Witch what?" "No, witch. Like in Macbeth," said Anathema. "I saw that," said Adam. "It was really interesting, the way them kings carried on. Gosh, what's nice about 'em?" "Nice used to mean, well, precise or exact. Definitely something strange. A sort of laid-back intensity. You started to feel that if he was around, then everyone else, even the landscape, was just background." She'd been here a month. Except for Mrs. Henderson, who in theory looked after the cottage and probably went through her things given half a chance, she hadn't exchanged more than a dozen real words with anyone. She let them think she was an artist. This was the kind of countryside that artists liked. Actually, it was bloody beautiful. Just around this village, it was superb. If Turner and Landseer had met Samuel Palmer in a pub and worked it all out, and then got Stubbs to do the horses, it couldn't have been better. And that was depressing, because this was where it was going to happen. According to Agnes, anyway. In a book which she, Anathema, had allowed to be lost. She had the file cards, of course, but they weren't the same. If Anathema had been in full control of her own mind at that moment, and no one around Adam was ever in full control of his or her own mind, She'd have noticed that whenever she tried to think about him beyond a superficial level, her thoughts slipped away like a duck off water. "Wicked," said Adam, who had been turning over in his mind the implications of a book of nice and accurate prophecies. "It tells you who's going to win the Grand National, does it?" "No," said Anathema. "Any spaceships in it?" "Not many," said Anathema. "Robots?" said Adam hopefully. "Sorry. Doesn't sound very nice to me then," said Adam. "Don't see what the future's got in it if there's no robots and spaceships." "About 3 days, thought Anathema glumly. "That's what it's got in it." "Would you like a lemonade?" she said. Adam hesitated. Then he decided to take the bull by the horns. "Look, excuse me for asking if it's not a personal question, but are you a witch?" he said. Anathema narrowed her eyes. So much for Mrs. Henderson poking around. "Some might say so," she said. "Actually, I'm an occultist." "Oh, well, that's all right then," said Adam, cheering up. She looked him up and down. "You know what an occultist is, do you?" "Oh, yes," said Adam, confidently. "Well, so long as you're happier now," said Anathema. "Come on in. I could do with a drink myself. And, Adam Young? Yes? You were thinking, nothing wrong with my eyes, they don't need examining, weren't you?" "Who, me?" said Adam guiltily. Dog was the problem. He wouldn't go in the cottage. He crouched on the doorstep, growling. "Come on, you silly dog," said Adam. It's only Jasmine Cottage." He gave Anathema an embarrassed look. "Normally he does everything I say, right off." "You can leave him in the garden," said Anathema. "No," said Adam. "He's got to do what he's told. I read it in a book. Training is very important. Any dog can be trained, it said. My father said I can only keep him if he's properly trained. Now, dog, go inside." Dog whined and gave him a pleading look. His stubby tail thumped on the floor once or twice. His master's voice. With extreme reluctance, as if making progress in the teeth of a gale, he slunk over the doorstep. "There," said Adam proudly. "Good boy." And a little more of hell burned away. Anathema shut the door. There had always been a horseshoe over the door of Jasmine Cottage, ever since its first tenant centuries before. The Black Death was all the rage at the time, and he'd considered that he could use all the protection he could get. It was corroded and half covered with the paint of centuries. So neither Adam nor Anathema gave it a thought, or noticed how it was now cooling from a white heat. Aziraphale's cocoa was stone cold. The only sound in the room was the occasional turning of a page. Every now and again, there was a rattling at the door when prospective customers of intimate books next door mistook the entrance. He ignored it. Occasionally, he would very nearly swear. Anathema hadn't really made herself at home in the cottage. Most of her implements were piled up on the table. It looked interesting. It looked, in fact, as though a voodoo priest had just had the run of a scientific equipment store. "Brilliant," said Adam, prodding at it. "What's the thing with the 3 legs?" "It's a theodolite," said Anathema from the kitchen. "It's for tracking ley lines." "What are they, then?" said Adam. She told him. "Core," he said. "Are they?" "Yes." "All over the place?" "Yes." "I've never seen 'em. Amazing there being all these invisible lines of force around and me not seeing 'em." Adam didn't often listen, but he spent the most enthralling 20 minutes of his life, or at least of his life that day. No one in the Young household so much as touched wood or threw salt over their shoulder. The only nod in the direction of the supernatural was a half-hearted pretense, when Adam had been younger, that Father Christmas came down the chimney. if Adam had been in full possession of his powers in those days. The young's Christmas would have been spoiled by the discovery of a dead fat man upside down in their central heating duct. He'd been starved of anything more occult than a harvest festival. Her words poured into his mind like water into a quire of blotting paper. Dog lay under the table and growled. He was beginning to have serious doubts about himself. Anathema didn't only believe in ley lines, but in seals, whales, bicycles, rainforests, whole grain in loaves, recycled paper, white South Africans out of South Africa, and Americans out of practically everywhere, down to and including Long Island. She didn't compartmentalize her beliefs. They were welded into one enormous, seamless belief, compared with which that held by Joan of Arc seemed a mere idle notion. On any scale of mountain moving, it shifted at least a 0.5 of an elp. It may be worth noting here that most human beings can rarely raise more than 0.3 of an elp, 30 centi-elps. Adam believed things on a scale ranging from 2 through to 15,640 Everests. No one had even used the word environment in Adam's hearing before. The South American rainforests were a closed book to Adam, and it wasn't even made of recycled paper. The only time he interrupted her was to agree with her views on nuclear power. I've been to a nuclear power station. It was boring. There was no green smoke and bubbling stuff in tubes. Shouldn't be allowed not having a proper bubbling stuff when people have come all the way to see it. And having just a lot of men standing around, not even wearing spacesuits. They do all the bubbling after visitors have gone home, said Anathema grimly. Huh, said Adam. They should be done away with this minute. Serve 'em right for not bubbling, said Adam. Anathema nodded. She was still trying to put her finger on what was so odd about Adam, and then she realized what it was. He had no aura. She was quite an expert on auras. She could see them if she stared hard enough. They were a little glow of light around people's heads, and according to a book she'd read, the color told you things about their health and general well-being. Everyone had one. In mean-minded, closed-in people, they were a faint, trembling outline, whereas expansive and creative people might have one extending several inches from the body. She'd never heard of anyone without one, but she couldn't see one around Adam at all. Yet he seemed cheerful, enthusiastic, and as well-balanced as a gyroscope. Maybe I'm just tired, she thought. Anyway, she was pleased and gratified to find such a rewarding student, and even loaned him some copies of New Aquarian Digest, a small magazine edited by a friend of hers. It changed his life. At least, it changed his life for that day. To his parents' astonishment, he went to bed early, and then lay under the blankets until after midnight with a torch, the magazines, and a bag of lemon drops. The occasional "brilliant" emerged from his ferocious chewing mouth. When the batteries ran out, he emerged into the darkened room and lay back with his head pillowed in his hands, apparently watching the squadron of X-Wing fighters that hung from the ceiling. They moved gently in the night breeze. But Adam wasn't really watching them. He was staring instead into the brightly lit panorama of his own imagination, which was whirling like a fairground. This wasn't Wensleydale's aunt in a wine glass. This sort of occulting was a lot more interesting. Besides, he liked Anathema. Of course she was very old, but when Adam liked someone, he wanted to make them happy. He wondered how he could make Anathema happy. It used to be thought that the events that changed the world were things like big bombs, maniac politicians, huge earthquakes, or vast population movements. But it has now been realized that this is a very old-fashioned view held by people totally out of touch with modern thought. The things that really change the world, according to chaos theory, are the tiny things. A butterfly flaps its wings in the Amazonian jungle, and subsequently a storm ravages half of Europe. Somewhere in Adam's sleeping head, a butterfly had emerged. It might or might not have helped Anathema to get a clear view of things if she'd been allowed to spot the very obvious reason why she couldn't see Adam's aura. It was for the same reason that people in Trafalgar Square can't see England. Alarms went off. Of course, there's nothing special about alarms going off in the control room of a nuclear power station. They do it all the time. It's because there are so many dials and meters and things that something important might not get noticed if it doesn't at least beep. And the job of shift charge engineer calls for solid, capable, unflappable kind of man, the kind you can depend upon not to make a beeline for the car park in an emergency. The kind of man, in fact, who gives the impression of smoking a pipe, even when he's not. It was 3 a.m. in the control room of Turning Point Power Station, normally a nice, quiet time when there was nothing much to do but fill in the log and listen to the distant roar of the turbines. Until now. Horace Gander looked at the flashing red lights. Then he looked at some dials. Then he looked at the faces of his fellow workers. Then he raised his eyes to the big dial at the far end of the room. 420 practically dependable and very nearly cheap megawatts were leaving the station. According to the other dials, nothing was producing them. He didn't say, "That's weird." He wouldn't have said, "That's weird," if a flock of sheep had cycled past playing violins. It wasn't the sort of thing a responsible engineer said. What he did say was, "Alf, you'd better ring the station manager." 3 very crowded hours went past. They involved quite a lot of phone calls, telexes, and faxes. 27 people were got out of bed in quick succession, and they got another 53 out of bed, because there is one thing a man wants to know when he's woken up in a panic at 4 a.m., it's that he's not alone. Anyway, you need all sorts of permissions before they let you unscrew the lid of a nuclear reactor and look inside. They got them. They unscrewed it. They had a look inside. Horace Gander said, "There's got to be a sensible reason for this. 500 tons of uranium dust. Don't get up and walk away." A meter in his hand should have been screaming. Instead, it let out the occasional half-hearted tick. Where the reactor should have been was an empty space. You could have had a nice game of squash in it. Right at the bottom, all alone in the center of the bright, cold floor, was a lemon drop. Outside, in the cavernous turbine hall, the machines roared on. And 100 miles away, Adam Young turned over in his sleep. My name is Ashley O'Mara, coming to you from upstate New York. I have been your war correspondent today, and I'm joined here by Death. Stay safe, everyone.